Ever get the feeling like you're on a roll, seeing all the right signs, and then something feels just a little bit off?
Oh, I know that feeling.
It's like that nagging doubt in the back of your mind. Well, that's exactly what we're diving into today, the unexpected challenges of discerning God's will, even when everything seems, well, picture perfect.
Sounds intriguing.
We're turning to Lauren Cunningham's experiences with YWAM, specifically chapters 11 through 13 of Is That Really You, God? To unpack this very dilemma.
It's so easy to equate success with God's blessing, outward success.
Exactly. And to really grasp this, let's rewind to the early days of YWAM.
Okay.
Picture Lauren and Darlene, fresh off establishing a YWAM school in Switzerland.
Right.
They're feeling pretty good, understandably confident in their ability to hear from God after experiencing some incredible confirmations along the way.
Such as?
Well, they found that perfect location, maybe a little fixer-upper.
The charming kind.
Exactly. And then there's the whole financial provision thing. Donations arrive with almost unbelievable precision, like down to the exact dollar needed.
Talk about specific. You'd almost think they had a direct line to the divine budget department, wouldn't you?
Right. Like clockwork. So naturally, when the opportunity to host an outreach during the 1972 Munich Olympics comes up, it's like, well, this is it.
Thousands of young people from all over the world. It's like a ready-made mission field.
Exactly. And who wouldn't be excited about that? But this is where things get really interesting because, as we'll discover, sometimes outward success can obscure the true heart of discernment.
It's easy to get caught up in the momentum, isn't it? To see those open doors, the seemingly answered prayers, and mistake them for the entirety of God's will.
Absolutely. And this tendency to see bigness as a sign from God pops up again later in a rather unexpected way. They needed a printing press for this outreach. Huge vision, printing 1 million pieces of literature.
Wow. 1 million.
I know, but they had nowhere to put this massive printing press they were given.
You'd think a printing press would be a little more portable. Where do you even start looking for a place for that?
Right, and that's where their go big or go home mentality takes an interesting turn. They stumble upon this.
Don't leave me hanging?
A castle.
A castle.
They buy a castle for the printing press.
Okay, now that's a power move.
Yeah.
You can't tell me that finding a castle doesn't feel a little like divine intervention.
It does, doesn't it? I mean, talk about a God-sized vision, right?
Right.
But it also reveals a subtle danger, this idea that outward grandeur equals spiritual significance. Just because something's impressive or extravagant doesn't automatically make it God's plan.
Very true.
And this castle situation, it's not the only time this tendency surfaces. Remember Lauren's idea for a ship?
The ship. Oh, you mean the one that's been brewing in the back of his mind? This vision for a YWAM ship?
That's the one. The very same. And seemingly out of nowhere, they meet this ship engineer who just happens to be feeling called to missions work.
Talk about a divine appointment.
Right.
I mean, what are the chances?
Right. It's tempting to connect those dots. But here's the thing. Even with all these seemingly positive signs, the castle, the potential ship, the engineer, Lauren admits to this nagging sense of unease, like something just isn't quite right.
Wow. So he's got this external confirmation, but internally there's a dissonance. That's interesting.
Isn't it? It's almost as if a part of him recognizes that just because everything seems to be lining up perfectly on the outside, it doesn't necessarily mean it aligns with God's heart.
It makes you wonder if we're so busy looking for those flashing neon signs that we miss the quieter whispers of the Holy Spirit.
Exactly. And sometimes those whispers come in the form of doubt, those, are you sure about this? Moments that we tend to brush aside in the face of what looks like success.
I've been there. It's so easy to get caught up in the excitement of it all. But ignoring those doubts, well, let's just say I've learned that lesson the hard way a time or two.
We've all been there. But that's where Lauren's story takes an even more fascinating turn as he travels to New Zealand to see this potential ship. It's like you're putting together this massive puzzle, right?
Okay, I can see it.
You've got all these pieces, the vision, the provision, the people.
And they all seem to fit, at least on the surface.
Exactly. But deep down, there's this nagging feeling, am I even working on the right puzzle?
And sometimes that's the trickiest part of discernment, isn't it? It's not always a lack of clarity, but recognizing when our own desires and perceptions might be overshadowing God's voice.
It's so easy to get swept up in our own ideas of how things should unfold.
Especially when you've got something as exciting as the Munich Olympics Outreach. Just imagine the scene.
I know. Thousands of young people all gathered at the castle, overflowing into tents.
All these different languages and cultures coming together, united by this desire to, as Lauren put it, reach the world for Christ.
It sounds exhilarating
Yeah.
and a little overwhelming, if I'm being honest.
I can only imagine. But you know what's interesting? Lauren talks about how the initial response they encountered during the outreach is, well, less than enthusiastic.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Imagine being a young, fired-up missionary during that time period, ready to change the world. And the world's like, yeah, that's nice. Can we get back to the games now?
Ouch. Talk about a reality check.
It's one thing to face opposition,
Right.
but indifference. It's almost like...
It's like your message is just bouncing off, not even registering.
Exactly. And as if that wasn't enough, they were also dealing with resistance from the city officials.
Really? Why?
Well, it was the Olympics. The city was concerned with maintaining a certain image, so no marches were allowed.
Oh, wow.
Their big music festival, pushed to the outskirts of town.
It's a good reminder that following God's will doesn't always come with a red carpet rolled out, huh?
Nope. And sometimes it even leads us right into the heart of situations that test our faith, forcing us to confront our assumptions.
Absolutely, which is exactly what happens in Munich, because right when it seems like this outreach is destined to fizzle out, tragedy strikes.
The terrorist attack.
Yeah, that horrific event that shook the entire world, the attack on the Israeli athletes, it completely changes the atmosphere in Munich.
You go from this celebration of athleticism and national pride to this stark realization of just how fragile peace is, how deep the brokenness goes.
And amidst that grief and fear, something remarkable happens. People's hearts soften. They become receptive to the message in a way they weren't before.
It's like this sudden shift, this recognition that the things that really matter, the things that truly unite us, run much deeper than competition or national identity.
It's profound, really, and talk about ironic. Those city officials who had been so resistant were now thanking Loren and the YWAM teams for bringing this message of peace and hope to the city.
And the newspapers they'd been handing out, now they were being snatched up.
It's amazing how such a horrific event can become a catalyst for such a profound shift. It's like in the midst of darkness.
People crave light, hope.
Exactly. But even as Lauren reflects on the impact of the Munich outreach, that persistent feeling of unease about the ship remains.
You mean that feeling that something just wasn't right, even though everything seemed to be falling into place?
That's the one. It's like a low hum of uncertainty that just won't go away, even as he's actively pursuing the ship.
Which brings up a really important question. How do we discern between genuine go signs that align with God's will and those that are, well, maybe not so much? Especially when we're caught up in what looks and feels like success.
It's easy to get caught up, isn't it? To see what appears to be miraculous provision and just assume it's all part of God's plan.
Absolutely. But Lauren's story really highlights the importance of hitting the pause button, even when everything's moving full steam ahead.
Creating that space for silence, for reflection.
Exactly. Because sometimes those subtle nudges, those whispers of doubt, they're actually the Holy Spirit prompting us to look a little deeper, question our assumptions.
To ensure that we're not just building our own kingdoms under the guise of God's will.
And those whispers, they can be especially hard to hear when everything external seems to be shouting, "Go for it. This is it."
It's almost like something out of a movie, the way Loren describes his trip to see this ship, the Maori.
Oh, how so?
Well, picture this. He's flying into Wellington Harbor, glances out the window, and there it is.
No way.
Yep, just as he pictured it. This massive black ship, nearly 500 feet long, docked in the harbor.
Talk about a sign.
Right. He boards the Maori, sees this expansive cargo hold. I mean, you can practically hear the gears turning as he envisions the school, the medical teams, all the lives that could be impacted.
It's like everything he's been dreaming of suddenly within reach.
Exactly. But here's the thing, and this is what I find so fascinating about Loren's story, even as he's standing there on the deck of the ship that seems so clearly like an answer to prayer, that unease doesn't go away.
It's like that feeling is saying, hold on a second, there's more to this.
Right. And it makes me wonder, how often do we ignore those inner alarm bells, those whispers of caution, when we're so fixated on pursuing what we think is a God-given dream?
It's easy to get caught up in the excitement, to convince ourselves that those doubts are just fear holding us back.
Absolutely. But what if, and I'm just throwing this out here, what if those doubts are actually the Holy Spirit prompting us to pump the brakes a little, to look a little deeper?
To ask ourselves those hard questions. Questions like, are we truly aligned with God's heart in this? Or are we trying to make something fit because it looks good, feels good, or strokes our own ego a little?
Exactly. Because let's face it, sometimes we can be a little too quick to slap a God's will sticker on something that really boils down to our own ambition or desire for significance.
Absolutely. And I love how Lauren's story challenges us to consider that sometimes the bravest, most faith-filled response isn't a yes, let's go for it.
But a humble, wait a second, God. Is this really you in this?
Because in that surrender, in that willingness to lay down our own agendas, we might just discover that God's plans, while maybe not what we envisioned, are far more fulfilling, far more impactful than anything we could have orchestrated on our own.
It's a powerful reminder that true discernment isn't about deciphering some cosmic puzzle, but about cultivating a deep, abiding relationship with the one who holds the puzzle pieces in the first place. So as you go about your week, maybe consider this. What's one practical step you can take to cultivate greater discernment in your own life? Is it practicing the power of the pause, seeking wise counsel, or simply quieting yourself to listen for his voice amidst the noise?
Great questions to ponder.
Until next time, happy diving, everyone.